I would like to warmly welcome, and I'm so excited to welcome, is Anne Lovejoy. She is, I always call her a Renaissance woman on the island, and she's in music and writing and a columnist and a gardener extraordinaire. I know she's helped me out. So Anne, welcome and take it away.
Thanks, Karen. It's always fun to connect with you. Karen and I met years ago working at Lindsley's Fine Clothing together, which was, in fact, I'm probably wearing some of my Lindsley's Fine Clothing at this very moment.
I am.
It's fun to sort of the connections of where did we all meet on this island over the years, you know, and trace it all back. It's pretty great. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is seed sowing, because this, believe it or not, is perfect seed sowing weather. It doesn't seem like it's perfect for anything but ducks, but it really is. And one of the things that will do the best is native wildflowers. And you can actually buy packets of them. Like here's baby blue eyes. Ed Hume's company has a number of them. California poppies actually grow all the way up into here. And these mixes have some really nice color blends in them. They're not all just screaming orange. There's many, many shades, even pink or cream or, you know, raspberry, some pale purple. And another one that doesn't really get known as well as native is Clarkia, or it's called Farewell to Spring. And that is technically an annual, but around here, like some of mine just stopped blooming about 3 days ago. And I planted them, I sowed them probably about now last year. They were blooming heavily in March and bloomed continually almost through the whole year. So Clarkia, or Farewell to Spring, is one of those annual natives that's really, really long lasting. And the coolest part about that, of course, is so many native pollinators will appreciate it, because native pollinators are not all as opportunistic as the European honeybees. Honeybees will go with anybody. They'll just date promiscuously. But a lot of our native pollinators have to have native plants or they don't do so well. So when we plant a lot of native plants with flowering native plants, we're actually making sure that we're supporting our native pollinators as well. And the California poppies are one of my favorites because they come in, like I said, so many colors, and they just bloom and bloom and bloom. But if you wanted to grow other kinds of poppies, like for instance, the Shirley poppy or the Iceland poppy, this is also a really good time to sow them, because the temperature range, actually this next week, it's supposed to be getting a little bit colder, but generally speaking, once you're into the mid 40s, low 50s, that's perfect sprouting weather for a whole lot of things, including sweet peas. If you grow sweet peas, you can save the seed, and they look pretty much like little pea pods. Like, you know, they will form a little pod like that. And when you break them open, instead of being the wrinkly pea like we would see in a regular pea, they're smooth little round balls. Let me see if I can find where I put those. They look like little tiny marbles. Of course, I had them out, and now I can't find them. But if you if you shake out the pods of the sweet peas, you'll see they're almost ready to start blooming too. To start sprouting, because they start swelling up as soon as the weather starts to get cool, and then you can put them in. Oh, here they are. Put them in the ground, and you can see what I'm using for seed containers. Does anybody recognize these?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
This had ginger in it. Now it's full of sweet peas. I think these little containers are awesome for saving seeds, but they just, I don't know if you'll be able to see if I do this with my hand. Is that pretty good?
No,
No.
The lid is in the way.
Oh, well. I'm trying to get my hand in the thing.
Ah.
There. That shows it, right? A little bit?
You have to
move over.
Anyway, trust me, they're little round things. And you can save seed of so many things. Like this is the seed of delicata squash, right? We have sugar pod peas. I have zinnias, and one of the most prolific things you can grow here is a calendula, which means calendar flower, because they bloom pretty much every month of the year. And they're actually European, but they thrive here, and they will self-sow and keep going for years and years and years. And they're one that a lot of pollinators really likes. They're also useful in the kitchen because you can use calendula petals, which are usually orange or yellow, but you can use them in cooking, put them in salads, use them as a garnish. And a lot of people who keep chickens give the calendula petals to their chickens, and it makes the yolks extra nice yellowy orange, really bright and deep colored. And it's a little extra vitamins for them too, which is kind of fun. But I love thinking about flowers in this season when there aren't really very many. If there's going to be something blooming out there, it's going to be sweet alyssum, it's going to be calendulas, and maybe a couple of poppies. I have a few that are still poking along. Of course, we can also look at things like hellebores, which are European plants, and they're just starting to come into bloom pretty well now too. They can get splashed by mud in this season. So if you want to put a little mulch underneath them or some bark, shredded up bark as mulch or straw, then the flowers won't get splashed and muddy and they'll look a lot more attractive. And also this is a really good time to cut off all the foliage of hellebores that's starting to slump. And a lot of it's discoloring. This is when they start getting molds and mildews and picking up botrytis and other funky diseases. So cut all the foliage down right to the ground, being careful not to cut the blooming stems. And that way, when the flowers come up, they'll stay clean and the foliage won't get infected from the old leaves. Because that's how it happens, is we let the old leaves compost in place, the spores are there, they grow on in the soil or even in the compost, and then they are there to infect the next set of leaves. Which is never very attractive.
So, Anne, this is great information. The hellebores. So what you're saying is even if the leaves are not looking sad, they're looking pretty good, you still cut them down.
Yeah, I do. Because again, you may not see what's on there, but and lots of times they do look pretty good, but they're still the old foliage. And what you want is the new fresh foliage. So it's like sword ferns, totally different. Sword fern foliage is supposed to last 3 to 5 years. And if we cut sword ferns, clear cut them every year, it actually weakens the root. And in nature, sword ferns can live for hundreds of years. But in our gardens where we're super tidy and we're always cutting them back every year, they can dwindle and die because we're not allowing them the good of the absorbed nutrients in that long-term foliage. So with sword ferns, you just want to cut the ones that start to go earthward. You know, they'll go to the side and start to sink down. Usually they'll have some brown on them. Take those all the way from the ground and take them away and shred them up or put them in your compost. But don't take them all off because, again, you're stressing that plant that's worked really hard to store those nutrients. And it's a really common tidy thing. A lot of you know that I'm not the tidiest gardener in the world and that I feel like when I grew up in New England, there was an expression, poison neat. And people would say, oh, she's such a housekeeper. She's poison neat. She probably had a plastic runner on the rug, and there was probably plastic on the furniture and plastic on the lampshades, and nothing could be touched, right? And that was considered poison neat. It was just too clean for the people. And I think our garden can be like that, too. We have to be sure to relax and let some nature happen.
So one other quick question, Anne. All of those seeds that you were just talking about, all of them are good to plant in the ground right now?
Yeah, and the thing about a lot of those seeds is you don't actually plant them in the ground. You simply scatter them over the top because they're very, very small. If you read a seed packet, it will usually tell you plant to the depth of something. Like for a squash seed that's actually probably 1/4 of an inch size, it might say put this a 1/2 inch down. Double the depth. But for something that's only the size of a poppy seed, you really don't want to do that. So you just kind of smooth out the soil or loosen up the soil, scatter your seeds, and you can tamp it gently with your hand. And that's all you want to do. And some seeds actually need light and air to germinate. Famously, weed seeds. So one of the reasons that you get a huge crop of weed seeds when you weed is because you're disturbing the soil that the seeds are in, and they don't germinate when they're covered up. They're unlike our garden seeds. They're happy as clams when you start pulling up weeds, and boom, their seeds are exposed to light and air, and they'll start sprouting like crazy, which is why you see shotweed everywhere right now, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So one way to get around that is to weed an area and quickly put some cover on it. Put on some compost, put on some shredded bark, scatter some straw, or in some areas, I've been using coffee bags, big burlap coffee sacks, because some of my neighbors are part of the coffee collective from Ometepe. So I have coffee bags from around the world, they're excellent for paths, and they're really good for covering up a problematic area for a season or two and really smothering out those weed seeds. And then you can take them off when you're ready to prep that soil, and you won't have the annual weed seed problem.
Good deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. That popweed is like, oy.
Shotweed is really difficult because it can actually bloom and set seed before it clears the ground.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it rises up pregnant, right? And so as soon as it emerges, it's ready to throw. And of course, we call it shotweed because it's the little seed pods are explosive, and they open, pow, and throw their seeds all over the place. And they used to call it jumping Jesus because you'd get it in your eye and you'd go, ah, Jesus. It was sort of a folk name for the response. But it's a plant that, like Scotch broom, is in the same family, and it has that same explosive quality. So again, it's the same kind of seed that Scotch broom seeds will also sprout best when they're exposed to light and air. So if you do deep wood chip mulches around Scotch broom while you're trying to clear it out, you'll keep a minimum of seeds sprouting, and you won't have quite the same problem. This is a great time to go after Scotch broom, though. If you cut old growth Scotch broom back, it won't sprout. Young Scotch broom can resprout, but it's also easier to pull. And the weed warriors have some weed pulling tools that they will lend out, or sometimes send somebody over to help you if you have acreage that's covered in Scotch broom and you're trying to clear it off. But again, big, deep mulches of coarse bark or shredded bark is going to be really helpful for that kind of thing. And for shotweed, the fine bark, shredded bark is really good. When it comes up in your driveway or gravel pathways, that's where it's kind of hard. But that's where a flamethrower tool is a friend. I used to say every girl should have a flamethrower of her very own, right? I got mine from Peaceful Valley Plant Supplies. I think I probably told you this before. And it came, and the UPS man is bringing me this giant thing, and it says, flame weeder. And he's like, wow, remind me never to piss you off. But I found it was the one tool my teenage boys at that time would always, always use. If I said, honey, will you guys run out and do some weeding? They're like, yeah, Mom, can we use the flamethrower? And it's a really great tool for things like cracks in a wall and stone wall where the weeds are always getting in there. You can flame weed those cracks, and you'll be able to kill a lot of the weed seeds that are in there. It's also a favorite hiding place for slugs, so you might be charbroiling some slugs at the same time. Kind of a 2-for-1. If you have that kind of stone wall with chinks and things in it, one other sort of proactive thing you can do is fill the chinks with soil, and then take a little straw and some seed of the fine seeds of things like the Sweet William or the some of the rock cresses and things, and you can actually tap it with the straw and scatter it, or you can sort of take it and blow it into the cracks and start at the top, and those plants will grow up. They'll seed themselves in, and then they'll start seeding themselves down each layer. It also works on a slope, of course, that if you start planting the top of the slope, things will seed themselves downhill from there, and you'll get a hand. Like nature and gravity are going to give you a hand with that kind of project.
Ooh, excellent, excellent idea.
Well, I'm essentially a lazy person, and I think when you start figuring out the easier ways to do things, it's really, you get more ingenious about it.
And I have a question for you, or some questions for you.
Sure.
This is my Christmas present from my environmental grandson. He said, there are 30 seeds in this bag, each one possibly containing a new friend for you. Try your best and have lots of fun. I thought of Anne immediately when I read that. Anyway, 10 large black ones are black spider grass. 10 small black ones are green spider grass. And 10 red are barberry bush.
Interesting.
Yeah. So any of those, can we, what I can do here and kind of thing, and what do I do? And
well, barberry definitely, because that grows extremely well here. And a lot of the barberry fruits are edible, though not all of them. So I think those would do really well. I think one of the things you're going to have to think about is that they get big, of course, and would have to be outside eventually.
I'm on the patio, remember that?
Yeah, it depends on the species. Some of the barberries can get like 8 or 10 feet high. Some are teeny, and it really would depend where he got the seeds. If he collected them himself.
Yes, he did.
Okay, you might ask him what mom looks like. You know, the size of that mother plant will determine largely the size of the smaller ones. And the thing that the spider grass thing is probably, I mean, that's usually the common name for what my grandkids call waterfall plant, or we call spider plants. They're very common, or they used to be common house plants. They're not so much anymore. But they cascade and they throw off long running arms, and then they have babies at the end of those arms. It's a great cat plant if you have cats, because it's non-toxic to pets, and they like to play with those long dangly bits, and they can chew them and bite them and fight them, no problem. But as far as I know, that's probably the. I'm not familiar with any other kind of spider grass, but you might just grow it on to see what happens, right?
They have black. These are black ones and green ones.
Yeah. Oh, then he's probably talking about liriope or lily turf, which is a similar looking perennial, and some are green and some are black. And black mondo grass would be the common name for that black one. That's probably it. They do look extremely similar, but they're not actually the same family. But yeah, those would be pretty, and you could grow them on your deck. The black ones often have a chartreuse heart, and they look really cool if you plant them under something bright yellow, you know, that kind of, or sort of chartreusey green, like maybe those sweet potato vines with heart-shaped chartreuse foliage, and that black grass with a little green heart. That would look stunning. So
can I plant those in my 6 to 8 inch deep planters?
Well, when you're starting seeds, you don't really want that much depth. So the best thing to do is to raid your recycling bin and look for some shallow containers, more or less like these, only maybe a little bigger. Though these would be fine for small things. And you want to poke some holes in the sides and bottom for drainage and for air, because all seedlings need air to the roots or they'll rot, which is one of the things that happens really easily to plants grown indoors. So if you got some food container or like a lettuce, those lettuce boxes, those are like perfect, because a lot of those actually have some holes in the sides already. And if they don't, you can just poke a few more holes. I use a barbecue skewer, but you can also do it with the end of a scissors or a small screwdriver or whatever. And you know, right now is a good time to be poking holes in stuff. If you're feeling upset and angry, you can just grab some stuff and poke a whole lot of holes in it.
Perfect.
Take that. Take
Perfect
that.
suggestion.
Let the bad air out. So anyway, I would fill them with just about an inch of, and I use a sterile plant seedling starter soil rather than trying to use garden soil, which is not sterile, which shouldn't be. Of course, you don't want it to be. But if you just use regular garden soil, you're going to bring in weed seeds and also possibly worms and maybe slug eggs and a whole bunch of other stuff that isn't really very desirable. If you have just potting soil on your, for your deck, you can probably use that. And just make sure it's not too deep. And then you set that in a rimmed, another container. And sometimes the lids of those have a little rim and are not perforated. And those you can use as a tray so that you're not soaking your furniture. And then you can do bottom watering, which rather than watering to the top, which can wash those little seeds all the way to the bottom, you put the water in the bottom in that tray and it will take it up through the drainage holes you just poked. And that will keep it evenly moist without tamping down too much compaction on top. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Do I do the same thing for the blackberry bush too? On the barberry bush too?
Yeah. So you start seedlings in small, shallow containers because, like I said, their roots need air, and in big containers they often will actually smother because there's too much container and the soil's compacted, and they're not getting the light, loose air, airy soil that they need. And when they start to get bigger, and the interesting thing is, if it's those what he's calling the black and green spider plants, those will probably just have one shoot. They'll be what's like they'll have not a set of true leaves or 3 leaves like most seedlings. They'll look like grass, kind of, only a little thicker. And then as they grow up, they'll develop 2 or 3, but they won't And your other ones, the barberries, are going to be more like a typical garden plant where there'll be a shoot with a set of what's called seed leaves. The first leaves are not true leaves. Let me know when I'm getting a little over, like, you can make the timeout sign if you're like, Anne, shut up, talk about something else. The first set of leaves of any sprout are the seed leaves, and they don't look like the true leaves. So sometimes people freak out and go, oh my God, this isn't right. It's supposed to have this kind of leaf. It will. But the second and third sets of leaves are going to be the true leaves, and they'll look like mom. They'll look like they're supposed to. But the seed leaves are the ones that protect the baby seedling as it's sprouting, right? So they are made sort of like cupped hands usually, and they're usually rounded, and then they open out and the seedling will proceed. And then you'll see the rest of the leaves coming as they're supposed to. When you get about 4 sets of leaves, then you can transplant them into 4-inch pots. And again, you don't want to stick them in a big pot because they're little, and they need to fill a 4-inch pot with roots before they're ready to be put into a bigger pot, like a gallon or 2 gallon or 5 gallon. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And after they have 4 or 5 leaves or sets of leaves, then you can start feeding them once a week with like half-strength plant fertilizer, because they've probably used pretty much the nutrients that are in that little bit of soil. And you do that maybe once a week or once at 10 days. And
When do you put them outside, or you do them inside all this time?
yeah, you do them inside all this time, and then you can put them, or those things you probably could put outside. They just wouldn't sprout very fast. They'll sprout a lot faster indoors where the temperature's higher, and they might rot outside because it's a little cool for some of those things. The reason, like when plants self-sow, a lot of times they'll drop the whole seed pod, right? And it won't be just a seed. And the seed pod serves to protect them until the temperatures start to rise, and then those seed pods rot and fall apart, and then the seeds themselves are free to start sprouting. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Excellent.
So when you start to take them outside, anything, whether it's, peas or cucumbers or tomatoes, you have to wait until the temperatures are right for that particular thing. Like if you started kale and lettuce and chard indoors, you could start hardening it off as soon as it was about 6 inches high. And then hardening it off process would be to take it outside on a warm day for a few hours and bring it back at night. And then after a while, you leave it outside, a little longer and a little longer. And you don't put it in full sun the first day or two. You let it get used to some sun. You put it in like morning sun for a little while. And then over the course of a couple days, you put it in stronger sunlight. And then you leave it out in full sun. But you're still bringing it in at night. And then you start leaving it out at night and sort of gradually getting it used to being outside, because many of our homes are pretty warm and outside is not so warm. And the shock can actually set the plants. They will literally stop growing. They won't necessarily die, but it will stop their growth until conditions get to be what they like. But things like garden peas and stuff, you can start planting those as soon as soil temperatures are in the high 40s, low 50s. And soil temperatures are really linked to nighttime temperatures. So if it's 60 in the daytime, but it's 35 at night, the soil's probably closer to that 35. It's probably somewhere like not quite 40. So you want to wait until the soil temperature actually comes up. You can, if nobody's watching you, you can use your Instapen thermometer from the kitchen on the soil and find out what the temperature is, and then just wipe it. We all have wipes now, right? Sanitize it. Don't tell anybody. My family doesn't like it when I get inventive with crossover kitchen stuff outdoors, but I think with proper care, it can be done perfectly safely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but you want to just check those temperatures, because one of the things to know is for any tropicals, and that's beans and tomatoes and peppers and eggplants and stuff like that, soil temperatures have to be at least 55 pretty consistently before they will really grow well or thrive. And sometimes that takes quite a while around here. So you don't want to start them too early, because then you have the problem of big leggy seedlings that are trying, starts that are really want to be outside and it's really not warm enough. I found last year a lot of people put out tomatoes in March, and last year was not really that great of a year for tomatoes, partly because March was not hospitable and April wasn't that much better.
Yeah. So
I think we have to really remember that. Though there's a real simple way to make a small cold frame. And Sheila, you could actually do it on your balcony. because you could use a box and the insulation you could use for a box is like that styrofoam panel stuff. You can make a little and taper the box so that the front is lower than the backs. Like, so put one box on the bottom and another box on top and cut the sides at an angle so the back is high and the front is low. And then you can put styrofoam in there and then a plastic sheet over the top of like the kind of plastic sheet you would use for paint drop. What do you call those? Drop cloths, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And at night, cover it. In the daytime, open it. And inside, put a pan with soil in it. And again, you'd have a drip pan underneath that so that you're not making a huge mess. But you could actually grow on. You could have your tomatoes and all that kind of stuff out there a little earlier than usual if you had a little cold frame like that.
Thanks.
I feel like I might have sidetracked you a little. Can't even remember where we started.
Rosalind, do you have a question?
Good. I'm just taking it all in.
Oh, okay.
I'm such a novice gardener. Anything I learn will be helpful.
I'm the same way.
Oh, Rose Alice, I remember your wonderful potato buckets.
Oh, yes. That's years ago. That was really fun. I did that with the grandchildren, you know, where you just had a garbage can and you put holes in it and then you keep layering it up with potato starters. And that was really fun. They never got really big, but we had a pretty good quantity, which was fun for grandkids to dig into.
Yeah, I remember that on your deck, right? Yeah. I saw somebody waving a hand. Who was that?
Rita. Hey, can I cut my hydrangea blooms off now? I haven't. Oh, did I not do that? Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you better. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Can I cut my hydrangea blooms off now?
Yes, you can. I mean, supposedly it's going to be a little colder next week, but nothing huge. I don't think we're going to have a giant cold snap, or at least Noah doesn't think so. And yeah, what you can do is when you look at hydrangeas, you look at the new buds are already there and they're swelling up, right? And sometimes they're teeny and sometimes they're big. What I usually do now is take the lower branches off most of the old hydrangeas, all the big sloppy ones that are toward the ground. I take those all the way off. And then any of the big gnarliest ones that look funky, I probably take those out too. And in the middle where it's all thick and tangly, anything that's going the wrong direction, inside or rubbing on another thing, I take those out. If they're gray instead of nice thick looking, take them out, right? And you can thin it. And then what's left, you cut back, you look at those, the whole thing, and you want to kind of cut back more or less to the same size. So you don't want one huge half being tall and one half being small. Yeah. But kind of pick. And then you get a nice set of fat buds and you cut at an angle about a half an inch or so above that pair of buds. Yeah. And you put at the angle so the rain will run off and it won't collect and rot in that bud pocket.
Right. Okay.
And you leave a little bit of a stub so that it doesn't just go right down. As it dies off, it doesn't kill off the buds. Does that make sense? But yeah, go ahead and do that now. And if there's one that you particularly like, you can take those stubs, the pieces that you cut off, and stick them in the ground somewhere, like in a nursery bed. And a lot of times, hydrangeas will root really well at this time of year, and you can make more.
Okay, that's great.
Wow. Hey, Barbara Golden had a question. Can we still plant flower bulbs?
Oh, yeah. The thing about planting flower bulbs late, I mean, you could plant them in June. What happens, of course, is they bloom off cycle. And if they still have time to recover and see, when flowers bloom, I mean, especially bulbs, all the flowers already in the bulb when you plant it. It's already formed inside there. And so then it blooms, then it needs to recruit its strength. So all the foliage that comes as it dies, the nutrients go down. You can sort of see how the leaves turn brown from the tips and go down. The nutrients are going back into the bulb as storage, right? So if you take the leaves off too soon, or you braid them, or you push the plant over, sometimes I've seen people do that. Lots of times it won't store enough to have another set of bulbs, another set of flowers the following year. So the better thing to do is, if you're planting them late, put them in a big pot so you know where they are, and feed them, and treat them almost like a greenhouse plant after they flower. And when they've bloomed, cut the flower head off. Don't let it form seeds, because that takes a lot of energy, and you want that plant to be thinking about the storage in the root. And hormonally, it's off cycle. So it's at a place where it's not going to be thinking about that unless you make it. Does that make sense? No.
Barbara, does that make sense to you?
Yes, thank
Okay, great. Thanks, Barbara. Super.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We have a geranium
Who's
that has wintered over twice now, or well, once, and just beautifully. And it's still blooming, although we've taken it down and had to put it in shelter. What do we do with this? Should we try for a third season?
Wait, I missed at the beginning because there were a couple people talking. What is it?
A geranium
Oh,
that we've
Yeah.
had for two years, and it's beautiful both years. So it still seems to be alive and kicking. I wonder, should we cut it back as usual and try it again?
sure. Yeah, they're perennial plants, really. It's just that this is not their climate zone. And many times my neighbors had some of the same ones for about 15 years. If they're protected in winter, and she just puts hers on her sheltered back porch, leaves them out in pots, and brings them
Yeah,
back
that's
out.
exactly what we did.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah, they're fine. If they were left out in full exposure and it got really cold, they would turn to mush. But in that kind of protected situation, they should be fine indefinitely. You just want to change out, like I usually wash the roots in the spring,
Yeah.
put them in fresh soil, and because they've exhausted the soil they have. And when I say wash the roots, I'm not saying put a power hose on them, but gently soak, put them into soak for just maybe half an hour, not a long time, and then lift it out and really gently with a watering can, not the hose, kind of rinse off the roots, and then spread the roots into fresh soil in a clean pot. And just because over time, those pots can accumulate a lot of the salts and things. You'll see a white crust from fertilizers and stuff. You want to get that off of there.
Wait, thank you.
Sure.
Wendy, do you have a question?
yes, I do. Hi, Anne.
Hi.
Good to see everyone. I just had a follow-up question on the bulbs. Since I'm home so much now, I bought, I don't know, like 30 paper whites, 40 paper whites, and half of them didn't bloom. And I'm wondering, should I try putting them in the ground at this point, or would it be worth even the effort?
Well, here's the thing about paper whites. They are not technically that hardy here in this climate zone. So in the ground, they tend to dwindle and rot. If they didn't bloom well, I would say, they might have gotten too warm in their storage before they got planted. If they came from, did you get them from like Costco or something? Because sometimes those are not kept as well.
No, I got them from a nursery, but yeah, half of them worked. It wasn't, I kept thinking of what I did, but I don't think I did anything different. I've always, forced these during the holidays, and I've never had this issue.
Yeah, it sounds like it's somewhere along the line the storage might be suspect.
Okay.
And
So
maybe,
let's just get rid of them.
yeah,
they're not-
but also you might want to take some and show the nursery and say,
I actually contacted them, and they gave me more. And
how did they do?
half of them bloomed and half of them didn't.
Wow. So they did get a
yeah.
backlash then, it sounds
Yeah,
like. Yeah.
right. Okay, good. I just don't need to dig more.
No.
I don't want to invest more time in them, but I do have a couple of quick questions for you.
Sure.
I have bark mulch now on a lot of areas in my yard, and I've not really used that before. And I'm wondering, how do if I have to supplement the soil, what do I do with it now that it's in some of the beds? Is it something, if I want to dig up and transfer, plants from one area to the other, and what happens if I have to supplement the soil? What do I do with all this mulch that's on top?
Well, here's the thing, like different kinds of bark are like arborist chips, which is the complete tree shredded all the way down, is usually fairly coarse, but that will rot down and generously amend the soil for you. If it's just bark chips, sometimes that causes problems because it really dries stuff out and it can shed water. But But all you have to really do is rake it away from the area around the plant you're going to dig up. You dig it up as you would anyway, and then you go ahead and amend that soil for something else. You're going to put another plant there or whatever it is, or just fill in the hole, and then you just rake that mulch back over it. And one thing it's really good for is like in woodland gardens where you're wanting to do some planting, but you can't even get in there. Just really deep mulch can help. Some of the Kitsap parks years ago, Kitsap County did a kind of a study, and they put in some places 12 inches of bark and in some places 18 and on ivy. And they found that, in 3 months it had killed like 80% of the ivy.
Ooh.
The 18 inches.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Well, I needed mulch and my husband went to get it and he came back with this stuff. And so I was expecting more of a, something that would compost better into the soil.
It will compost, but it just won't do it as fast because, compost is already, I'm hearing an echo. Is that?
I don't know why.
Sorry. It will compost, but it won't do it quickly, in short. But that's great for like a woodland setting, like I said.
Good. Thank you.
Sure.
Wendy. Rita, did you have a question? Your hand's up. That's okay.
She probably has a knitting question.
Oh, I know, knitting. Yeah, I know. We're gonna have to have a whole different program for that one.
We do every Thursday. We knit together online.
Isn't that wonderful? That is so great. So I was out walking around and I saw some baby rosebuds. I'm like, really? It's January. It was you're off of Nectal, down by close to Madison. There was baby rose.
Oh, yeah. If you walk up to the library, you'll see that those big rose bushes on both sides of the entrance are covered with buds. They're not new. They're from last year.
Mm-hmm.
But they just continue. And a lot of rose bushes, if they're not pruned back, they'll keep blooming intermittently through the year, and definitely through the winter. Especially a lot of the lower growing ones, like the carpet roses or the those sidewalk pavement roses and stuff. Those are very long blooming. So there's nothing. And in fact, if you pick them and bring them into the house, they'll usually open, but not really very successfully. They'll open and kind of fall apart pretty fast. But they're trying.
Just leave them alone.
Rosales?
I've got a few camellias out, which is surprising to me.
Oh, yeah. We're seeing a lot of camellias blooming. Of course, there are winter blooming camellias. This is like at Eagle Harbor Church all around. Those are the winter bloomers that start up like in November and continue till about March. But yeah, some of the spring blooming camellias have been blooming off and on for months now. Yeah. They're just confused. Wendy.
Yes, speaking of camellias, I have one that I wanted to get moved and it's not currently blooming. Is it okay to move it? And
yes.
No problems? No Same problem. With a rhodie. It's not an issue.
Easy.
Yeah.
Easy.
Yeah, good.
Though if it's of any size at all, the most efficient way to do it is to cause it to be done by others. I really am a firm believer that being outside a little bit every day is really good for our bodies and our spirits. And so I would say, even on a rainy day like this, it's not raining right this minute, take advantage and go out for a little walk and see how many buds you see. Look at all the branches on the shrubs and things, and you'll notice buds are swelling already. And that's guaranteed to lift your spirit and make you feel a little better about the world.
Yes.
Also, you might notice how many birds you're seeing. And I think I started saying earlier about how one of the benefits of not being a very tidy gardener is that all winter long birds are looking for seeds and bugs, and they need protein. And so looking for insects is a big bird activity, and they're much more likely to do that in a slightly wild garden or a slightly unkempt garden. Whereas in a sterile, super tidy, vacuum cleaned environment, there's not much life there and there's not much for them to do. So I think it's a good lesson for us to be a little more relaxed about our approach toward tidying, and remember our friends, the pollinators, and our friends, the birds, and be supportive of that whole natural cycle. I think we have to kind of put on new lenses and learn to think that the sight of bare branches is really quite beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I keep telling my son-in-law, because he's Mr. Tidy. But I'm working on him to get it so that we have a little bit more wildness in our yard.
Even a few areas can help.
Yeah.
They found, it's really amazing how much diversity can be found in, like in Seattle, they were doing a study of the yards versus the alleys, and the alleys were full of life, full of insects and birds. And some of the yards were sterile as can be because they had the poison neat lawns with, green chemicals, craps on them. But in the alleyways, there was bushes and shrubs and perennials and bulbs and all kinds of things that had wandered out of the gardens. And it was a flourishing ecosystem. I thought that was wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you quickly. I have a lot of fuchsias, and I have a couple standard fuchsia bushes, and I'm just wondering, do I prune them now? It seems like I waited until March, the end of March or sometime, to prune them down. So that's my question.
Yeah, I usually wait with fuchsias because they often carry their blossoms well into winter. Mine are still got covered blossoms, and I still have hummingbirds coming to them. So I wait because they're using, that's a valuable resource for those hummers. My kids gave me hummingbird feeder for Christmas, my grandkids, and I took down a basket of fuchsias that was kind of past itself, but it still had a few blossoms. And I put the feeder there, and the hummingbirds were there before I got to the door. They immediately moved right in because they knew that was a location for food. But I thought that was pretty impressive. They're very clear about where they can go. So rather than take away anything that's supporting them, I just like to leave those hardy fuchsias blooming as long as they do. And then you can cut them back in March or April, no problem.
That's what I thought. Okay, another question with the same thing. I have hanging baskets of fuchsias too. Those were standards, but I have hanging baskets, and I've been doing this just to make sure it's okay. I've been putting them in the garage before it freezes too much, and keeping them, and then I prune them down in March, about way down, and put them back out again when it's warmed up a little bit.
Yeah.
And I put them to hibernate. I don't water them or anything. I keep them in the dark in the garage. Is that okay? Should
Sure,
I give them a little
fine.
bit of water? A little bit of water. I feel a little guilty not giving them anything to drink.
Yeah, they can dry out too much, but they also can stay outside in just a sheltered environment. I have mine on a covered porch, and they just sit there through the winter. And then I usually knock the soil out, and I cut them back, knock the soil out again, rinse them off, replace the soil. I might replace the liner of the basket if it's funky, and then give them a new start, and they leaf right out and keep going. A lot of those, the rule of thumb with fuchsias is that the upright fuchsias are hardy, very solidly hardy here. And some of them can be 8-10 feet high, although others are not. But the hanging basket ones are on the tender side, and they tend to have larger leaves and bigger flowers sometimes. Those definitely need a little shelter, but they just are sitting on my porch on a bench out of the direct, but they're actually maintained. The moisture is maintained because it's not an enclosed deck, it's just a covered deck, if that makes sense. So they're still getting a little bit of rainwater and lots of humidity. And they're just sort of in stasis.
Mine are in the garage, so they don't get any rain in them. So
yeah, they don't get any light either. That's the thing. So they really are dormant. But if you don't need to do that. If you have a place you can keep them outside, they might. It doesn't really matter. If they do fine that way, then they're fine. I mean, they'll tell you pretty fast. If they don't like what you're doing, they'll die.
I don't want them to.
Right.
I just had one more question. We have 3 blueberry bushes in pots, and they've been in there for about 5 years. They're doing well. They've been producing well. But do you think that we should be repotting, or what do you think?
Well, here's the thing. If they're doing well, you're probably feeding them, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So they're fine. But what happens after a while is that plant soil turns into just something to hold the plant upright. It's not really a nutritive environment anymore. And that's okay, though. It sounds like you're on it. They're happy. They're producing. But if they stop being productive, then that's probably time, because they might have outgrown the pot. There's some great blueberry varieties now that are being specifically bred to live in containers, and they usually do better because their roots don't start pushing against the wall. They don't get restless for a bigger. And And so like Top Hat is one that was bred for patios, and it it will live in a 5-gallon pot for years. So
Top Hat. Okay.
yeah, and North Star, I think, is another one. There's quite a few, and you can ask at the nurseries if they have any specific container. And there's actually some raspberries that were bred to be, they're thornless raspberries, bred to be container plants, which is really amazing when you think about how those roots usually just take off and grow everywhere, right?
Right, exactly. Oh
Yeah.
my God.
So, you know, the hybridizers are aware that a lot of people have smaller places, and like Sheila, just a patio maybe. And so they're thinking about plants. There's even squash varieties, you know, like Patio Star summer squash that's
Mhm.
bred to do well in a 5-gallon pot.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. Okay. Well, thank you.